Welcome to Start BT Now podcast to let you know what's going on in your world and my world. Your guy, my guy, right guy.
We have an awesome show here today. We're joined by Michael D. Herman of Michael D. Herman, Esquire and Associates, fantastic attorney located here in the Maryland area, specifically in Riverdale, Maryland. We're going to put their information up here on screen and in the description, but without further ado, we just want to say thank you so much, Mr. Herman, for joining us.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Just delighted to be here and delighted to talk about, how do we protect patients and how do we protect people who have been injured and the best things that they can do to help maximize their situation.
Well, listen, let's jump right into that. And more importantly, in the state of Maryland, is there anything new in 2025 that we should be aware of, or the top three changes in the MVA laws for 25?
Well, there's a couple of changes that affect motor vehicle accidents in particular. One has to do with insurance stacking, which has a situation where there's certain policies that people are permitted to get now, and they get them automatically unless they waive them, that when you have somebody who is, got poor insurance that hits you and you have insurance certain coverage, you can actually get more policy coverage, which is good for people who get, fairly catastrophically injured in an automobile accident. That's one of the real big ones that's affecting this. And I think that's something a lot of attorneys have been focusing on and trying to educate some of the, residents of Maryland about this important new thing they have to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And I know although there's some new things coming along the pipeline, like you said, you're no newcomer to this area. You've been a practicing attorney for 10 plus, 20 plus years, 10 plus with your own, in your own private practice here.
Oh, yeah.
And then
been doing this for 30 plus
years in total. So we really feel privileged to have this opportunity to talk to a real expert in the field. And the flip side of that is not everyone is an expert, and maybe not even knowing what personal injury is. So I wanted to ask you, firstly, what is personal injury?
Well, it sounds like just what it says. Personal injury. It means you personally have been injured by another person. Most people's concept of what a personal injury really comes in about four different types. Automobile accidents that many people understand. Sometimes slip and falls because of the conditions that are at a location. They don't mop up a floor properly and somebody slips and breaks a bone or something like that. There's also medical malpractice, which, I know I'm talking to some people in the medical field here. I don't want to talk too much about that, but the reality is, the doctors and medical providers are held to standards of care. And when they deviate from those standards of care, there's an opportunity for people to get compensation for that. And sometimes it's very serious. And another area is workers' compensation, which is when, people are injured on the job and, they are entitled to certain compensation, not just for their treatment of their injuries, but also potentially for any diminishment of their abilities following that accident, plus the time that you're away from work, getting compensated for that. So that's what most people think of in the personal injury arena. There are other types, but they're a little bit more arcane and not really worth discussing here today.
Now, out of those four, it seems, I think for the general public, auto and workers' comp would be the top two most of your clients, I would say.
I would say, yeah. I mean, workers' comp is kind of a weird area because unless someone's been really very badly injured, a lot of attorneys don't do workers' comp work. And part of the reason is because it's very difficult for compensation for the attorneys to get. Whereas in slip and falls, med mal, auto, those are generally more lucrative, not only for the firm or the lawyer that's doing it, but also for the person who's, benefiting from the services of an attorney as well.
Yeah, and you talked about compensation, workers' compensation, things like that. It kind of brought to mind the question, how does the compensation process work in personal injury cases, and what factors can impact the settlement amount?
Wow, that's a big and a deep question, but it covers a lot of areas. Let me say this: there are a lot of factors that give rise to the value of a case. Yeah. One, of course, is naturally how badly are you injured? Somebody who gets bumped in the back of another car and has a slight aching back, that's a minor injury. It's a soft tissue injury. Sometimes that can lend itself to some compensation, but you're not expecting that person to be out of work, unable to fulfill their responsibilities at home or do the various things. But one of the things that really has very high value to an individual who might be injured has to do with what is the cost of their medical coverage? What are the costs of their medical services that they need? We often recommend to somebody, as soon as you're involved in an accident, a slip and fall, any of these kind of injuries, the first thing that you need to do is go immediately to an emergency room or to an urgent care center, because the earlier that you report this stuff, it really helps in terms of establishing that the injuries that you had really do justify the need for medical intervention. Right. If you wait for a week or 2 weeks and say, I'm going to see how I feel on my own, I'll take some over-the-counter medicine, I'll take some Advil and see how it goes, and then things don't improve after a couple of weeks, and then you go to a doctor. When we're dealing with the insurance issues related to this, people are going to say, I don't know, it sounds like someone's really padding this case, just trying to turn it into a valuable case, even though someone legitimately wanted to not go that route because they really just wanted to see how does the body heal on its own.
Right. It's a bit of a tricky spot there, yeah. Because some people, I know I can be stubborn in a similar way sometimes. I'm like, I can figure it out on myself. It'll get better on its own. But, especially when it comes to the claim there, it sounds like that could really hurt your case.
I often say to my clients, and people will say this, I said, look, when you go talk to a medical provider for the first time, you might have been playing sports in high school or something where you're used to, quote, playing through the pain.
Right.
I said, I want you to do the exact opposite. I want you to go to the medical provider, whoever you're going to see, or the therapist that you're involved with, and I want you to be the total wuss. I want you to tell you everything that hurts, and I want you to explain it in as much detail as you can. Don't exaggerate, but don't hold back, because that's the first report of the nature of your injuries. So if you're not saying that right from the get-go, you're necessarily having an adverse effect on your own case. So if you tell them all the body parts that happen, when the medical providers are doing their work, they have what they call treatment modalities. Right. And the services that they provide are based on the modalities. So there's a coding for this, a coding for that. And that affects the value of the services that they're providing. It also means what is the degree of medical intervention that's necessary to treat you to get you back healthy. And let me just say one thing on a really very personal level. The real value in also going to the urgent care and then to your follow-up physical therapy or sports medicine is you're going to heal faster. You're going to have a better outcome at the end. Look, you're born with one body. This is the only one you got. You got to treat it like it's your own temple. Yeah. And if you don't, and you have residual effects later on that could affect you for 10, 20, 30 years, and you say, I should have. Don't think about I should have. Do it now. Yeah. Take care of it, do the right things, and you won't have to have those regrets later on.
It sounds like it's a very time-sensitive issue as far as reporting, getting to the right professionals like yourself. And I would love to play devil's advocate here. Let's say get rear-ended. I feel like I'm all jolted, but I feel good enough to get out of the vehicle. Am I better off just waiting in the vehicle till the ambulance comes, the fire department, so a medical professional comes to check me out versus me thinking, oh, you know what, I'm still good enough to get out of the vehicle at that point?
Look, that's a judgment call. If you feel that it's minor enough to get out and talk to somebody, that's up to you. I would say this, that most people, when they've gone through an accident or a highly shocking event, they got the adrenaline going.
Correct.
They don't even know sometimes how badly injured. I've had a guy who had literally had a separated shoulder who was helping somebody else to get out of a car because they were really pumped on their adrenaline and didn't even realize that the therapy they were going to need for months was related to injuries they already had while they were helping to assist somebody else. So I'd say that's a judgment call for somebody. You make a determination, but just because your adrenaline's going and you've got this feeling that I'm okay, get yourself checked out. I mean, that's usually the best case scenario. And even if you go to urgent care, if you don't have all the medical coverage to do this, go do it because, there might be something that you just don't see and it might manifest later on. And that's why it's good to go to a medical professional to let them make that determination. And then if therapy is warranted, then that's likely what's going to happen as a follow-up.
And I think there is that important part, not only from like a personal body standpoint where it's like, yeah, you want to try to get the medical support, therapy if needed, after that sort of incident to ensure there's not those long-term issues, but also there's like the legal side of it. In that regard, why is physical therapy important after an injury? And like, how could it impact the outcome of someone's personal injury case?
Well, let me say this. Let's just use the slip and fall auto accident or something as an example. Fall down or you've been hit by another car. The most important thing that you have to do is realize that if somebody caused this injury, somebody's going to have to pay for that because you're going to have what they call pain and suffering. That's the value of your case. Now, the way that they determine pain and suffering of a case is they look at your medical providing costs, any services that you needed, like extra services. I had to have a cleaning lady come in because, I couldn't clean my house for 2 months.
I didn't even think about that.
That's another thing. I mean, or I had to have somebody bring meals to me. I had to have somebody. I
Medical
needed domestic
assistance
help
at home.
Yep. And it might be atypical for, say, a younger person to think about this, but think about the people who are a little bit older who already are, not at their peak of their physical performance already anyway. And you might need assistance here. So all of your pain and suffering is going to be directly tied to the out-of-pocket costs, the medical stuff, the duration for which you need that service or services. And then also there's lost wage claims. If you missed work as a result of the condition that you have. These are all things that go into determining what is a fair compensation for you. Now, I tell people that the best thing that you do is, the first thing is you get emergency care. You asked the question a minute ago about, should I get out of the car? Look, if there are some people who need to be taken out with the jaws of life, they have no choice but not to get out of their car.
Right.
But you go to the medical provider, you might be transported by ambulance. If they offer you transport by ambulance, it might not be the most convenient thing, but it might be the best thing for you. Go to your emergency provider. Then I really tell people, contact an attorney. Really important because they're the ones who are going to help protect your rights and your interests right away. They have relationships like with you folks with really smart and capable aftercare, whether it's going to be physical therapy, whether it's going to be chiropractic or whatever kind of necessary thing. And even if that conservative treatment is not enough, you might have to go to an orthopedic specialist. You might have to go to different things. But you don't really know what the extent of it is because most of this stuff's invisible. It's inside your body. Right. It's real easy to see a broken bone where it's coming through the skin. But how about when you've strained 3 of your ligaments in your knee? You don't know that except that your knee feels a little wobbly, but you might need surgical repair. Who knows? Anyway, sorry.
No, actually, and I'm very curious too, what is the most common right in Maryland we have as drivers, or we're protected under, that most people may not realize they have a right to?
I tell people that there's a very important right that you have that a lot of people don't understand until they've been in an accident and they've done this wrong. You're involved in an accident. Let's say insurance company X is the insurance company for the other driver. You got hit from behind, the person ran a light. It's pretty obvious who caused the accident. Maryland, we have what we call a contributory negligence state, which means that if you're a little bit responsible for the accident, you can't recover. In other words, if you caused it partially, even though they may have mostly caused it, doesn't make a difference. So let's say you have an example, hit from behind, somebody runs a light. It's pretty obvious who caused the accident. A lot of times you're going to report it to your insurance company. You're going to get the other person's insurance company. You're going to report it to them. And the other insurance company is going to say, I'd like to take a recorded statement from you about the accident. The first right you should say is, thank you, I will do that at a later date. And the reason is this. They are not taking that recorded statement for your benefit. They're taking that recorded statement for the possibility of using that against you at a later time on the cause of the accident. So I always tell people, first and foremost, report the accident. Tell them that you intend to hire counsel, and yes, it involved injuries, blah, blah, blah. But don't get into all the facts, because they're making a recorded statement and they want to use that against you at a later time. Then you'll talk to your attorney. Your attorney will say, you're never giving a recorded statement to them. You have to give one to your own insurance company because that's the law. It's a contract.
Right.
But you do not have to give it to the at-fault driver's insurance company. And I tell people, don't do it.
I'm not saying anything to anybody without talking to Mr. Herman first.
That's right.
Even when I go home tonight, I'm not saying anything. I'm going to call you first.
When the wife asks what's for dinner tonight, you're like, I got to make a call.
That's it.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. I mean, look, we're not the only law firm out there. There's a lot of firms that do this. But I tell people, when you're selecting a lawyer, there's something that's really important here. One, you want to have somebody who's got experience doing these kind of cases. But two, you have to hire a firm that is not afraid to go to court when they get a stupid offer from an insurance company. There are some law firms, unfortunately, and this is very sad. You know, they'll negotiate the best deal they can, and then they'll settle the case with the insurance company. I have a whole bunch of times where they make stupid offers. I tell the client, I said, look, this is really bad. Let's go ahead and sue them. I bring lawsuits all the time. I love going to court. I love trials. They're really fun. But the more important part is once you bring a lawsuit, they start upping their settlement offers. In other words, they're saying, yeah, now that you're serious about doing this,
It's going to cost us more just to go there.
it's going to cost more. And then I always tell the insurance company, I said, look, you've gone up to trial against me 100 times, and 100 times out of 100, I've gotten more money than the last offer that you made. Maybe you should make better offers, and we don't have to waste our time this next time.
Right.
And it seems to fall on deaf ears, but our clients have benefited from this because we've gotten very good recoveries for our clients.
Too, I think it also lends to the fact that you have this trust factor with your counsel where you can say, hey, yeah, let's take a swing at these guys because you know what? This is not a fair judgment to me.
Sure.
Especially if you've been hurt severely. So definitely can understand that.
Yeah, they're always minimizing their exposure. They don't make money for their shareholders because they're paying out big claims.
Right.
They're trying to minimize it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting a bit into insurance, and I think that's something that a lot of people get confused on. I think probably some common misconceptions when it comes to what you're entitled to, what your insurance covers and doesn't cover. And so I wanted to ask you, let's say for like an auto incident, for example.
Sure.
Can you use your personal car insurance for medical expenses involved with a personal injury case?
The answer to that is probably.
Probably.
And let me explain. That could happen in a lot of different ways. In the state of Maryland, unless you make affirmative waiver of the premium, we all have what they call personal injury protection or PIP coverage. That means there's an extra, it's usually multiples of $2,500. Most people have $2,500 of PIP coverage. And, you know, it costs about $70 or $80 a year. But as I tell people, if you're involved in one accident with injuries every 25 years, it pays for itself. That's one of them. And if you're a passenger in the car and the driver that you have of the car that you're in has PIP coverage, you're covered in the same way. Well, but if you have your own independent policy, you're going to go under your own PIP policy even though you were in somebody else's car when it happens. Sometimes in D.C., Washington, D.C., there's a thing called MedPay policies. And that's when people, rather than electing to go after somebody on a lawsuit and trying to get pain and suffering, they just want to have them to pay their medical bills.
Okay.
And there's a MedPay policy. But the answer is yes, there are provisions in your own insurance policies and the policies that people have that covers some of the medical bills.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you go after the other insurance company, who is the at-fault driver, and they're going to pay all your medical bills if they're found to be responsible.
Yeah, and you touched on something really interesting. You said when you're a passenger in an accident as well, that you can use your personal car insurance as a passenger, or is that on the driver's insurance?
No, it could be on either or both.
Okay.
Because it's either or is the right answer. Because if I'm a passenger in your car, hypothetically, and I have my own auto policy, I'm going to have to go under my own PIP policy for the accident that happened in your car, even because I was a passenger, because I have my own insurance. But let's say I'm a passenger who has no auto insurance. I'm a passenger. I don't drive. I'm a passenger in your car. You have PIP coverage. I've got $2,500
automatic.
First $2,500 of my medical bills, and it's not just for medical bills. That could also be for lost wage claims too.
Right.
So that's a PIP coverage. This is the benefit again of using an attorney who knows what they're doing, because myself and our experienced team in our office is going to examine all possible pots of money that you can possibly explore to help offset the medical costs for the various things that you're going to need to get yourself healthy. And, leaving money on the table that you've already paid for is just kind of silly.
It's like me coming to work here, but that's for another day. But I actually will, while we're at the subject, what if I don't have insurance and someone hits me? How hard or difficult is it to work with the driver's insurance at that point?
Well, it's complicated. First of all, if you have insurance and the other person has no insurance, you have what they call uninsured motorist coverage. That means if the other driver is driving a stolen car, or, they didn't pay their premiums,
right.
They come in, they have no insurance. Your insurance at whatever levels that you have, 30, 60,000 policy, whatever it is, covers you. So you get to go against your own insurance company. Your premiums don't go up because it's not your fault. They basically cover you at the same level of policy that you have for yourself. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's something that happens in most states in the United States have uninsured motorist coverage protection.
Right. And I feel like, unfortunately, not everyone has the same level of knowledge or, experience that you have. So there's probably a good amount of common mistakes or even misconceptions that come with, maybe a first time or dealing with a personal injury case. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make during the personal injury process?
Well, we've already covered a few of them today. One of which is to not get immediate medical attention, not to reach out to somebody in advance. And even if you hire an attorney and that person, you can't find them, they disappear into this fabric, fire them, get a new one. Right. The reality is that that's a big mistake that people do, is that they don't seek counsel early enough. They don't seek medical treatment. Another thing that they often do is they give these, it could be what we call a he said, or he said, she said case. Yeah. This person came into my lane, that person came into my lane, I came into his lane, blah, 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 blah. When you give a recorded statement to the other person's insurance company and you don't say the magic words, they're going to use that and twist it against you. And they're going to say, oh, we're denying liability here, and the only way you're ever going to get a penny from us is to sue you. And then you go to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, did you give a recorded statement to the other person? They said, yeah, we gave it to the other side. And I said, okay, well, what did you say? Well, I said blah, blah, blah. And I was like, we're not going to interest your case because you've already given evidence that's going to hurt you.
So let me ask from a legal side, since they are disclaiming that we're recording the conversation, but they're not putting a disclaimer saying that this can also technically be used against you.
No, you don't get Miranda warnings here.
No, but technically they should give someone, especially after being in a traumatic event, a warning of, hey, you know what, anything you say to us, it's going to be, it should be self-evident, but you're right. In the moment, you're not thinking of those words crossing the telephone.
Well, as the old expression goes, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And that's the idea that, the part of this process of educating the public is to make sure you know what your rights are.
Absolutely.
What your responsibilities are. You have an obligation to give a recorded statement to your own insurance company. That's just your obligation. It's a contractual right. But you do not have to give it to somebody else. Also, I tell people, less is more. You're on the scene of an accident, say less, don't do it, just get the information. You're entitled. If the other person is not going to give you their information, their insurance information, or whatever you say, fine, let's call the police. And then you call the police. Let the police come and sort it out.
Okay.
Don't get involved in a fight. Don't get involved in a whatever, because Sometimes that happens. And not everybody, man, you bet you did this to my car. I'm not giving you, diddly squat, and you're like, well, no, actually the law says you will, but if you're not going to give it to me, the cop will tell you to give it to me. And we'll just call the police.
And if we're talking rights and responsibilities, I think we've gone through some really important rights that people might not know that they have, and that they can exercise. But there is also that responsibility, not only carry yourself through the process in the best way and the most responsible way possible, but also in going through with the things involved in your personal injury case. And so that could be anything from, making sure you're following up with your attorney promptly, you're giving the proper information, as well as if you're working with a medical provider, making sure that you're following through with your appointments, the things covered in your insurance.
Well, that's one of the big things that cause people to have the lower the value of their case. They'll start with a therapist, and, sometimes it's inconvenient. You might be going 3 times a week, you're going after work, you're tired, you had a hard day. I'm just going to blow it off today. You start having spotty attendance at your therapy, and it looks like the therapy was not necessary. So then the insurance companies say, yeah, we don't think it was necessary. You were just doing this to pad your claims. Or you don't get released from your medical provider because you decided you want to take that 2-week trip to Cancun. And but you haven't been released from your provider yet. That's just a bad idea. And then it looks on the medical record, it says left against or,
not
left
compliant. Before. Yeah, all that. How do you work through a problem like that when you're working with a client who's not being
compliant?
Thank you.
Good question. I think what we have the first conversation when they meet with me in the office, and we say, look, there's very few things that are going to take me to the point where I'm going to consider dropping you as a client. But one of them is not following medical advice and deciding that you're not going to follow through with the required therapy that you've been already ordered into. And I emphasize that very clearly in the beginning. Our office has a very good rapport with the medical providers. I'll get a call and say, hey, Mike, Mrs. Jones hasn't shown up. She's not returning any calls. We haven't seen her in 10 days. And we'll reach out to Mrs. Jones and find out what's going on. Every now and then there is a legitimate things. I had somebody who stopped doing it because what happened? They had a catastrophic injury. They were in the hospital. Yeah, that's a good reason to not be at therapy. They were hit by something else and, they were not able to attend their therapy sessions. It's okay. We work through that. But I think the hardest thing is if you have a really good rapport with your client and you tell them the expectations right up front and you tell them, look, this is stuff that's going to affect the value of your case. In a perfect world, an attorney is going to get 1/3 of the value of the settlement or judgment. The medical providers are going to get 1/3, and you're going to get 1/3. And if we're really lucky, you're going to get more than 1/3. But don't do anything to alter those values because you're affecting everybody's ability to get compensated for this catastrophic event.
Right. And I think it kind of brings it full circle for me because it's this process, like you said, there's like 3 parts of that equation, everyone working together and relying on each other in one way or another. And so I wanted to ask you, being from the physical therapy perspective ourselves, how can physical therapists and attorneys work together best to ensure the best possible outcome for a patient?
I think that's a really insightful question because what it really means is that the physical therapist should not be afraid to pick up the phone and call an attorney. This is not some amorphous person who's not available. And if the attorneys are never available to you, don't work with them. But say, look, I have this patient, Kwame is doing okay, but I think I really need to refer him to an orthopedist because I think the conservative treatment we're doing on his knee is not doing it. And I think we might need an MRI of his knee to determine whether or not maybe there's a partial tear of the ligament. The attorney will say, look, first of all, as an attorney, my first reaction is I'm not a medical provider. If you think that that's what's warranted, you do it. Because my goal is to make sure that not only my client is compensated, my goal is to make sure that my client gets healed. Right. I want my client to be as much as 100% back to the way they were before the accident happened. So sometimes I will have these problems that happen, but I will get called from the physical therapist and say, Mike, we're having a problem. And I'm going to do the outreach. Our paralegals are going to do the outreach, whatever needs to happen to get them back into compliance. don't wait until it's too
6
far
months.
gone. Yeah, don't say, 6 months. I haven't seen him in 6 months. Well, thanks for calling me 6 months later and letting me know.
No, B2B communication is extremely important, especially in your world, because everything's moving so quickly. And I think we're getting ready for our last question here. And once again, we'd like to say thank you to Mr. Herman for making time down here to share this great knowledge with our audience. And we're going to put up all our information for your practice right about now. And Raya, close us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull it back for the last question and ask you on a personal level, what sort of inspired you to get into this field of work?
Well, this is not the only form of practice that we do. I've worn a lot of hats. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a government official. I've been an elected official.
We're going to get into that later, Mr. Mayor. Trust me.
So you know all this stuff.
Yes.
But the reality is that part of what drives me in the practice of our firm, I mean, we have 7 lawyers. Our goal is to make sure that we do good value, but we really want to make sure that we are helping people. I don't have, I have some business clients, but we're not here representing corporate America. We're representing average citizens, people who sometimes even undocumented, people who have been injured or hurt or have a problem that they didn't ask for. They've been sued, they're suing, whatever it is. And our goal is just to say, look, we want to do good work for people and we want good outcomes. And we recognize that the law needs to serve people. The law is going to be subservient to the people. It's going to act as a vehicle, but it should never act as a bar, a thing that should prevent people because they don't understand it or it's too difficult to comprehend. It should not be a barrier to entry for the average citizen. And that's what our firm is all about, working with the citizens, working with the community, making sure that our people are protected and their rights are protected.
And we're all in the people business, and if we don't take care of our people, they don't take care of us. Is that
Amen.
simple? And anything else you would like to say or to our audience or add for the end?
No, I just want to first of all say thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for having me, our firm, and I hope that the wisdom or some of the things that we talked about is going to really benefit some other people. And thanks for providing a forum for that.
Well, we thank you again, Mr. Herman, so much for taking the time, joining us, sharing your expertise with the people. One final shout out. This has been Mr. Michael Herman of Michael D. Herman, Esquire and Associates in Riverdale, Maryland. The links are in the description below, and those visuals are also on screen. So be sure to give them a shout out. And if you need anything, you know where to find them.